Hey everyone, Kuro the Artist here. I am here with two very special guests today on the channel. Previous collaborator here is once more to talk Danny Phantom. We have Offbeat Kiki. How you doing here today?
I'm feeling amazing.
I had a lot of fun putting together the first video with you. Now we got a whole other novel to talk about. And what better way to talk about this novel than with the author herself? How you doing today, Gabby?
I'm doing great now that I'm with y'all. Thanks for having me.
You are the writer and illustrator of this book, is that correct?
Yeah, that is. So to clarify, I do like the thumbnails and the inks and the lettering, and I paint the covers. However, the colors and the backgrounds are done by the amazing Killian Ink. They are just an incredible artist. I've been a fan of them for longer than I would like to admit, because that might be creepy. It was like a Hail Mary to get them on, and they did, and they just did an amazing job.
Would you like to explain to the audience who might not be familiar with yourself or your work, a brief history of your journey in where you started in your career and how you ended up landing on Danny Phantom of all things, which you said you were a big fan growing up in your childhood? I
started watching, I think that came out in 2004. So watching that on like a tiny little CCTV that we had in our kitchen. That's the main reason I actually got into the fandom, was to go on the forums to find out when the next episode would air and then grab a VHS tape so that I could rewatch it and then like replay it again and then trace it on paper. Be like, oh my God, my Blorbo.
Traced it too?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. There was also that nice little bumper that Butch Hartman did of how to draw Danny. And
yes.
So, yeah, okay, yeah. Real was no. Steven Silver's style is very unique. He also did Kim Possible. So that really changed my way of thinking about art, and I really wanted to go into cartoons. And then for some reason abandoned that in high school. High school's weird. Went to college to study oil painting. Didn't work out. Thought I was gonna be John Singer Sargent, like as if. Transferred to RISD, and because as you can see, I'm a fan of The Legend of Korra. I went into animation. That was short-lived, and I went into comics and I got super depressed. Relatable content. And my friend Andy said you should make a zine to kind of like exercise a demon and just do it on a hyperfixation. I did it about Danny, and that was in 2019. We raised a bunch of money for dialysis, and I was like, okay, cool. I exercise a demon. I never have to think about Danny Phantom again. And then 2020, I get a call from Abrams and Paramount that's like, hey, you wanna be a part of this project? And I thought it was just a draw. So then I was like, sure, who's writing it? And they're like, oh, ideally you would be. And then that's when I almost peed my pants. And I was like, yeah. For the first book, I was also working on Babysitter's Club and another book, Invisible, for Scholastic. Probably lost 10 years of my lifespan, working on all three of those at the same time. So it's been nice to kind of get out of that and kind of move more into the purely Danny zone.
Did they reach out to you specifically because of your Danny Phantom project?
I don't know. I assume that, I don't know why else they would have reached out to me, because it's not like I was active in the fandom. I was never active in the fandom, actually. Like, I made some fan arts, but it wasn't like to put into a fandom. It was more like, I made this cool thing, I'm gonna drop it and then, forget about it. At that time, I had already been working on several middle grade graphic novels, and that was, I think, also what they needed, who had experience making that and meeting deadlines, which I can mostly do.
What led them to want to make Danny Phantom novels in the first place, opposed to the show or the movie or all these alternate continuations or reboots?
I was put in touch with the original editor who was in charge of that, Russ, who's a really cool guy. He reached out and said, yeah, Abrams had purchased a bunch of IPs from Viacom Paramount, so that includes SpongeBob and some others as well. So they were going to produce books regardless. Why they chose a graphic novel, I don't know. Maybe it's like a thing to test the market to see if people are still into it. I have no idea. That's pure speculation on my part. All I know is that I benefited from it. As far as who's pushing it, your guess is as good as mine.
A lot of mysterious forces behind the scenes.
The ghost in the machine. And eventually, through some extended talks, we were able to come to the conclusion, like, okay, no, we don't want anything that's in the past, and we don't want it to be too forward in the future, like college years or anything, because that's what I assumed it was supposed to be. And they were like, no, we want it to be like right after the finale, to reintroduce a whole new generation of kids to that. And when they said that, that kind of broke me too, because I was like, what do you mean a new generation of kids? It wasn't that long ago. It was like 20 years ago. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah, it makes you feel so old. I had a kid come to a signing once who was like 10 years old, and I'm like, wow, like you're into Danny Phantom? He goes, yeah, I love retro cartoons. And I was like, ugh!
I think I was on Neopets, and I found out the show was getting canceled through like a Neopets forum, and I was like, oh my God, I love Danny Phantom. They can't cancel Danny Phantom. So then I just spent like that whole summer like diving into the fandom on the internet, like reading like old boards and like joining a Danny Phantom guild on Neopets and like tracing the art and stuff. When I went to college, I was like, that's cringe. And then I stopped thinking about it for a few years. And then I graduated college and I was like, there's some people talking about cartoons on YouTube. And there's not a video about Danny Phantom that I feels like covers everything. So then I spent a whole year making a video on it. And then it actually got seen. And then I like became a cartoon reviewing YouTuber. And now I'm like known for talking about the show as like a big part of my online persona. I'm like a designer professionally now, and I never would have taken that path and like, done all this artistic stuff if it hadn't been for this cartoon that I was hyperfixated on as a young child.
That is so cool.
Short version.
Okay, I remember when they announced that it was going to get canceled, and there was like a group of people to like write letters or something.
Yes, and they would do the rallies at the office too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I have friends who actually were there, which is crazy because that's like 20 years ago.
We just read through your latest novel, Fair Game, which sparked some questions on our end that we'd love to pick your brain about. I've pulled together questions from across Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, and Reddit, encouraging fans to chime in. We are going to try to answer as many of them as we can with what we have here. In A Glitch in Time, I was surprised to see Vlad brought back so soon, along with some heavy hitters like Dark Danny, aka Phantom, and Clockwork. Then in Fair Game, we revisit fan favorites like Wolf, Danielle, and tackle Valerie's story, which was one of the biggest threads from the show that lacked a proper payoff. So it seems like you're not just telling new Danny Phantom stories, but you're specifically targeting storylines that fans have been very vocal about seeing their conclusion. So could you walk us through your process in deciding what characters and plots to give attention to when creating these novels?
For the first book, I was kind of given carte blanche to do whatever. We tried to narrow that down a bit, and so my thought was, okay, for me at the time, the biggest thing left unsaid was Dark Danny and what happened to him. So I thought, okay, that could be like a cool thing for the older fans to get something out of, and it's like a nice way to reintroduce the Danny soup and the essence of the Danny show to new readers, because a hero's only as good as his main villain, and that was Vlad. That was a nice way to bring Vlad back in, bring in Clockwork, and kind of introduce what the stakes are. I didn't know how many books I was going to get, so I also wanted to nip the Valerie thing in the bud then too. The original script had that mixed in as well, but that ended up being a bit unwieldy, so I cut that out and just kind of hoped and prayed that we would get another book so we could give that more time. Dealing with Clockwork also would allowed us to make some little fudges, because also they wanted smartphones and stuff, and I was like a little hesitant because I wasn't sure what timeline we were operating in, so it's very fuzzy. So I was like, okay, if we introduce Clockwork, then we can kind of do some gradations here. Although to be fair, the show ended in 2007. We did technically have iPhones and we did have Twitter, so it's not that realm of possibility, IMHO. But yeah, I got a lot of pushback from people who were like, I can't believe they used a smartphone. Unsubscribe and whatever. And I'm like, okay.
They had like holograms and teleportations and portals to alternate worlds. Tucker can have a smartphone.
When we got the okay to do the second, I was like, okay, yeah, naturally we're going to talk about Valerie. We had a general thing that we wanted like a story kind of plotted out that would go over several, ideally 4 books. And it's not a promise that we would get them. Literally every book, it's in the hands of y'all. To your point about bringing Vlad back so early, I also was just like, if I weren't just reintroducing, I probably wouldn't have brought it back so quickly. But I was also surprised because I had people being like, I thought he was dead and you brought it back to life. And I was like, I never got that. I remember watching that finale and being like, he's just drifting in space, I guess. Like, sucks for him.
I think it was ambiguous on purpose. I used to entertain the idea that maybe he was dead, but like, I think the way you handled it was very good. I just wanted to say like, thank you for recognizing Valerie's importance to the story, and sentiments online are like, they really love Valerie and have always wanted to see Valerie confront Danny basically.
Yeah, Valerie's so cool. Oh my god.
How difficult was it to balance sticking to like the canon of that 3rd season while trying to create a whole new story?
I mean, season 3 has some of my favorite episodes. I think the issue is more so one that a lot of sitcoms tend to fall into, where the show resets after each episode. And so this growth that we saw all these characters go through kind of gets retconned again and again, where Danny once again has to learn not to treat his friends like sidekicks, or once again has to learn maybe he doesn't need to be popular. And that was the main thing that I kind of wanted to work off of, was like, okay, season 3 had not as much to say as the previous ones, so that actually was easier for me because there's more platform to work off of. The problem for me ultimately was how much of the finale do we keep in order to keep the same Danny vibes, because again, that was the main thing that they told me to do, was reintroduce Danny as it was, but make it palatable to kids. Now, the big issues in the plot that was driving him him forward and making him such an interesting character were the same ones you have with Spider-Man, which is he's gotta be keeping some kind of secret. I didn't go into it with the intention of retconning that whole ending, but as we wrote it, we kind of thought, well, it would be cool if he does have this hero moment where truly he can have the happily ever after he really wanted, or he can do the most heroic thing ever, and he's had a taste of that. He knows just how good it is, and he sets it aside. That was my kind of like my answer to a lot of the question that kept coming up, especially in season 3, which was, will he choose himself? Will he choose to be a hero? And yes, the answer is yes, he does. Let's move past that and into the next chapter of his life. And that's kind of also symbolic with putting Vlad to rest as his main villain, because that's kind of what he stood for, right? Like, are you going to use your powers for yourself or not? And now that that's no longer the big question, we can kind of put Vlad off.
You found a really great balance between, because, you know, Phantom Planet was a very controversial finale. Some people hate it and some people love it, but I think you found a really good way to incorporate what happened in that story, address the concerns that people had about it, and then wrap that up into like a new era for Danny Phantom in a really nice way.
He had a month to live in this happy ending. It might not have been that happy anyway. We have Dark Danny coming in and destroying Amity Park, and his parents immediately go into pseudo-military mode, right?
Yeah.
And they're down to just kill him. And Jazz is the one who's reminding them, you know, your son is in here. This is your son. This is like the worst part of him, but it's still him. And they are absolutely uninterested in negotiating with that. And Maddie even says, that's not my Danny. And I'm speaking as a queer person, like, two things can be true at once. Your parents can love you, and they can still not love all of you.
Yes.
And I think that's something that maybe we could explore more.
Your art in these two books honor a lot of elements from Steven Silver's original design philosophy from the show, but it still is clearly your own original style with unique line work and shape language. The second novel especially gravitates more towards original artwork. The way you draw lasers and ecto energy really stands out to me. I love the swirls around the beams. That looks really cool.
Thanks.
So what does the illustrator side of you have to say about working on Danny Phantom?
Oh, it's so fun. When I was working on the original, I was neck deep in Babysitter's Club, Invisible, which are two very, very different art styles. So it was difficult for me to kind of go back and forth between that and Steven Silver's style. So I think that's why it isn't quite the same. It's not nearly as on model or anything like that. This time I had a bit more free time to actually get to spend more time on each page. I got to really learn more about the Steven Silver style. And it's funny because when you actually study it, I'm like, wow, there's like tangents and stuff that like in my head, I was like, these shouldn't exist. But when you look at it, oh, they exist and they're fine. And so it turns out a lot of stuff you learn in art school is bogus. I've been working in middle grade slice of life, so I never get to draw action. So getting to draw people get laser beamed and punched and through multiple dimensions was just so fun. I could really just go crazy with the paneling. And then, you know, our guy at Paramount was great. His only notes were like, explosions. Because I'm used to getting like 200 notes from Scholastic that's like, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this. And by the way, it's all due yesterday. And with this, it's like, sick.
I'm curious to know if there's like things about the style that you find like difficult or interesting or inspiring versus like other styles that you've drawn in.
When you rewatch the show, you can really tell when each episode came out, like in what part of a season, because the characters look vastly different.
They've changed so much, yeah.
So much, and especially like in the third season, everybody's eyes become like really tiny.
They're more rigid, yeah.
My favorite style personally comes midway through the first season when you get to Public Enemies and Fright Night. It's actually very angular. So that's kind of what I was going for initially, but when I look back at Steven Silver's designs, they're actually not as angular as I would have thought. It'll be like a straight line somewhere and then curves. The cool thing is also like it was not made to really turn well in 3D.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that even in the show, they really don't do much of that turning the camera, which is fair. I would not want to either. So that was another thing in trying to translate that, like what you see on the TV versus the AMV you have in your head sets of Linkin Park. Mixing that with Sean Galloway's style. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He did the designs for The Amazing Spider-Man back in the early aughts. That really turns well in space, and it has a similar kind of angular to swoop proportion.
So the first book was a large-scale epic adventure across time and space, while this story was more leveled, and it was a more personal story about Valerie and Danielle, and the way Danny's life affects others, intentionally or not. Is there a writing style you gravitate more towards? Do you feel comfortable with like the big stories, or do you like the personal character storylines?
I personally like the mundane. I like slice of life stuff. So I think I was more comfortable writing that. That said, I did like getting to do my cosmic horror thing. I enjoy doing both, but I think I do feel more comfortable writing the more interpersonal stuff, especially if it's like Degrassi, the Next Generation kind of teen drama. That's always fun.
A few things about the rules of Danny Phantom have like changed in the books, and the main one, in my opinion, being what ghosts are. I wanted to know like what inspired your idea for making ghosts manifestations of human emotions versus the traditional idea of what ghosts are in our pop culture.
Now, I haven't been plugged into fandom since like 2006. So a lot of this stuff came as a surprise to me when people come up to me for signings and they go, oh, you did ghost cores or something. And I'm like, oh, like the elementary school curriculum? I thought it was a natural progression from what we saw, a way to unify the stories that we got throughout the canon, because initially, at least in the first season, we get a lot of ghosts with human backstories, whether it's Poindexter or Desiree or the Dairy King, Don Channel. And then we get straight up just weird stuff going on. I guess you can explain Penelope, Spectre, and Bertrand, but also the ectopi. I don't know how you say that. You know, like how do we explain that? The emotion thing, I think it still works like as far as what a traditional ghost is, because from what I always understood ghosts is like something emotionally surprising happened in a particular space-time, and that's why we have this recurring character or this time loop going on. And so that also helped for me explain the different doorways that are scattered all throughout the ghost zone. You open a door and it's a train rushing at you or something. Like that makes sense. Like there are these loops that were so horrific or good. I mean, they could have been good too, where they're just stuck in perpetuity. The hope was that these books were going to be for a new generation, but the OG Degrassi probably is going to be the ones buying this book. So I'm like, I think it would be cool if we got some answers to what this world is. This kind of like a mystery to everybody, including Vlad. And it was also a nice way to tie in that weird thing he was doing in Rainstorm where he was collecting stuff and he had like this master plan that then didn't go anywhere.
I think that was a very satisfying answer to explain a lot of ghosts, because like you said, there's ghosts like Poindexter and then there's Vortex, and like there's supposed to be the same thing. I always had the headcanon that like most of the more monstery ghosts were probably just spirits that were dead for like hundreds and hundreds of years, so like ecto energies devolved them into like these mass weird gooey creatures or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an easy one-to-one for our own emotions. Like if you really leave yourself unchecked and don't go to therapy and like never do any kind of introspection, like a lot of these very normal rational emotions that you feel, you know, justified grief or anger can kind of spiral into an all-encompassing entity that just is completely different than how you started.
Hey folks, this interview's been a blast so far, but from this point forward, most of our questions will have major spoilers for the novel that we don't want to ruin for you just yet, so we'll be saving that for a future video. For now, I'd like to plug my own Danny Phantom project titled 5 Years Later, and you can watch it right here on YouTube. And if you'd like to support the series, we're releasing trading cards with hundreds of our original artwork. Pre-orders start in December, so give us a follow to stay in the loop. But until next time, keep it fizzy. Special thanks to Andrew Analik in the ink cartridge tier, and Elizabeth Susan and Maps in the ink barrel tier. Your contributions greatly help the future of this channel, and we couldn't do it without you. Thanks.